Okay, recording.
All right, everybody, welcome to the first Destreza classical dialogue hosted on the internet, as far as I know. Yeah, normally I have a speaker that I can introduce and I read their bio. But this time what we're going to do is Eric and I are going to ask questions. And this is not an episode of Maestros Know Best, so we're going to try to keep whatever answer we might have like to ourselves. And we want to invite you guys to work through some ideas together to talk about your answers to these questions and maybe to have a dialogue with the other people on the call, a friendly dialogue, I would hope, where we work through some ideas. And I loved what Kate did with the, if you strongly agree with the statement, post a 1 in the chat. And if you strongly disagree, post a 1. If you strongly agree, post a 5. So we've set up one of those to warm people up before we. That overwhelming. Yeah, if you strongly disagree, a 1. If you strongly agree, 5. Everybody clear on that? Expression of Destreza or not. That's the game that we're going to play. 1. I like to talk trash about other fencers. All right, lots of 5s. I see a 2 in there.
Couple hopefuls, right?
Yeah, some people that still like cling to the belief in humanity.
Yes, but I thought Destreza was supposed to make us better people.
I was going to say, those are folks who haven't read the story yet.
Okay.
Let Eric read the next one.
Recreating the system as written.
Can you say that?
Recreating the system as written.
Depends on who wrote it.
E1.
We're getting a little more spread on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, here we go. This one should sort the children from the adults. This will be a tough one. When I teach, I expect you to trust what I am saying without question.
-1.
Obviously, we did not explain the rules well enough because a lot
I think that's right.
totally.
Okay. How about the best defense is a good offense?
I'm a counterpuncher. That's not true.
We got the whole gamut on that one.
We did. We really did.
That's interesting.
I have opinions on that.
I would say I might come back to that later to
Yeah,
get some
that's a good one.
clarification.
That's a good one.
All right, I'm changing some of the tradition for competition and modern gear.
I don't have to like it for it to be the case.
One middle ground. Okay.
Really, yeah, middling on that one.
Yeah. Okay. How about I don't care if you're hurt. You should have parried.
All right, that one's pretty decisively in one direction.
Yeah, I think we have some agreement there.
Okay. How about this one? This is a little more on the edge case. I'm saying Italian tradition, but Destreza is my filter for good technique.
So are we the Italians imagining this, or?
This is
Yeah, what's
somebody
the
who's
perspective?
telling you that they're practicing Destreza, fencing solely within the Italian tradition, but they evaluate the quality of what they do using the Destreza methodology. Is it Destreza or not?
I have opinions on that too.
No.
Take a look at the Neapolitans, and we'll see what happens from there.
Well, Italian. Okay, what period did Spain own Italy at that point? What are we talking about? Italians?
So, so in the later half of the 17th century, so 1850s,
1 to 5.
Yeah, we got to
Okay.
stick to 1 to 5. We will give you a chance to knock it out.
It's the Habsburgs. Who owns it?
The answer is a fish.
True.
Drop an integer in the chat and hug it out later.
Right. Right?
So,
Okay, go ahead.
how about my system is a hybrid style of Destreza and German sources?
Note that negative numbers are integers.
Oh man, there's no love for that one, is there?
That looks pretty decisive.
Yeah. A rough day to do a hybrid.
Best to do. Best was 2. Wow. Well, yeah, people liked the Italian one more than this one.
No, that actually was a mistake on my side. So.
Did you do the last one or did I do it?
I just did it.
This one's choice. It's going to be so good. I do fence in a way that Pacheco would disapprove of. He would literally send me to the Inquisition.
But don't tell Pacheco.
That's kind of a trick question because he'd pretty much send everyone to the Inquisition.
I think that qualifies you as Destreza if Pacheco doesn't like you, right?
He's the examining master for all of Spain, and the answer is uniformly yes. I'm fencing Destreza.
He would
I'm
kill
pretty
me.
sure he'd think I wasn't allowed to use a sword. I mean, let's be real here.
All right, Eric Nixon is on
Yep.
you.
You were a punk.
Where we go. I use what I know to improve the world around me, but fencing isn't my thing.
Can you repeat that one more time?
I use what I know to improve the world around me, but fencing isn't my thing.
Oof. Based on Carranza's dialogues, I can't go 5, but I'll give it a 4.
Right, right. Exactly.
Yeah,
And the numbers we're getting, everything's right.
Yeah.
This feels like a weird calibration series here. I don't know what we're up to, but I'm a little concerned now.
All right.
See,
last
what we-
tough one.
Is each of us going to get a detailed personality test result after hour?
Oh my God, Facebook test. You got to make this into a personality test.
The Destreza Enneagram.
That's right.
Which humor are you based on?
All right, last one. Maybe I will create a Destreza quiz for this. I fence with a marble in my mouth. Anybody know what that reference is from? That's George Silber
Oh, yeah. Okay.
talking about the Spanish. Okay. So we've gotten through all those questions. We had a couple that really created a lot of, let's call it healthy disagreement. So now what we want to do is invite you all to talk about some of these above examples and help us figure out how to sort these into Destreza, non-Destreza. Maybe we go after one that got a lot of disagreement. The best defense is a good offense.
Okay, so if we're talking about Destreza, I mean, the number one rule is you start from a position of defense, right? Medio de proporción inherently implies you are defended yet capable of developing your offense. And you know, even when you've actually struck your opponent, you're supposed to be in the ideal position of being still defended but succeeding in your strike. So defense is obviously the paramount idea here in terms of the Destreza fundamentals. And double hits just get you more push-ups. So the best offense is not what we're looking for.
And to go further from that, at least Figueiredo, if not more authors, also said a single-time offense defense, like a single-time attack defense, is not Destreza because you are not safe. Only strike from a secured position. I'm quoting the authors, yo.
I'm just going to play Pacheco's advocate here. I agree. I was a 1 on this because I use a 45. If I'm offensive, somebody's stabbing me with their dagger, and I'm way too close to them. But at the same time, some of the techniques that have worked for me, as Puck brought up during my conversation, are directly from Pacheco's counters to the Vulgars. And one of them involves, and the only way I've ever been able to really make line and cross work effectively is by being aggressive with it from a low to a high position. So that's one of the few times I've actually been able to make line and cross. One of the foundations actually work was by being aggressive.
But let me ask you a question. Were you in really uncomfortable? Were you in control of steel or time when you did that successfully?
Or distance?
Well, time, distance is functionally a measure of time.
It's extremely risky, which that's the question as to whether that really makes it Destreza because of the risk. But you're still
Aggression
using
and
the
offense
principles.
are separate things.
I mean, if I die a Diestro, I was still a Diestro until I die.
So let me throw two things out here for a little bit more comparison. Barbasetti, the famous Italian saber master, he had a quote that the best parry is the blow. Right. So that's one thing. But also in an Italian tradition, we have a time thrust, which is considered pretty safe. That's great. It's a single time counterattack against someone who is actually attacking, right?
It's the during period. I mean, I'm a 1 on this, but at the same time, I can definitely see the argument for, I mean, how do short people get in on me if they're Diestros without being aggressive? You can't, unless you try to wait for me. I'm always going to have the advantage where the sword crosses. So,
but aggression is not offense. Aggression is a separate thing. I can be aggressive in securing your weapon. I'm not trying to offend you. I am trying to your weapon.
Okay, then is that offense then? Best defense?
No, because I'm not attacking you. But you are turning the phrase really. I'm going to let you continue because I think you have a point.
I like the quote that Roman uses at the beginning of his, and it's a Napoleon quote if I remember, and it's essentially a carefully structured and intended for the defense grants you the ability for an audacious offense. Right? If you don't have your lines closed, you're going to get stabbed in the face, and that's just the first time. So your first priority is defense, or 10 actually has rolled into my head. Your first priority is defense. Your second priority is defense. And as long as those two priorities are handled, then maybe get around to the offense. But stay safe at all costs rather than try to establish an aggressive, offending first intention and eat 3 feet of steel.
So I want to kind of develop this conversation a little bit. So we've got a couple of Destreza examples where an adversary is attacking us, and the attack includes dispositive movements. So within that space, we can throw right angle on the adversary. It looks to a classical fencer like attacking into an attack. To a Destreza fence, if it's attacking into dispositive movement. Likewise, in the same sort of family of actions, we have acometimiento, which is an attack which draws dispositive so that you can redirect. Both of those are pretty, like, right angles listed as a defense, but it's a pretty offensive action, the way that's traditionally thought about. So is there a place for that? Yeah, go ahead.
Can I toss out an opinion? So my thing is, like, if we're thinking, like, Destreza was developed in the late 16th century, and meanwhile in Italy and the other, like, in the wider fencing context, we have these there doesn't seem to be a clear division between offensive and defensive actions. A lot of the techniques are kind of pulling double. In the Italians have their counter guards, which close off a line, but simultaneously set up either an attack or a sequence of attacks. In Destreza, we have our right angle, which maximizes both defensive distance and offensive reach. So that's pulling double. An attack can be considered a set of conditions for an engagement that sets up an offense that's still, but it's still defending you. It's closing off a line. It's performing a lot of the same functions as a counter guard. So I'm thinking, like, why does it have to be either or? Why can't it be both and?
Here's a question, though, is because we're comparing the right angle to an offensive action. Is threat the same thing as offense? That's kind of a question, I guess.
I think I would say it in the context it is, because I know when we're drilling we tend to break things down into static pieces, but really in an engagement, in a bout, everything is moving, right? When we place an atajo in a drill, we hit there and we stop. But if we're really in reality, the atajo is on its way to something else. And if it ever does stop, then it's a weakness. It's not even a good defense at that point, or a good offense. So I think you have to look at everything as being all of these fundamental building blocks of right angle, of atajo, they're all things to be used in a moving, flowing process. And so I think from that standpoint, we would look at all of it as being, it's all contextual. These are the causes, right? Not only where are we, but where are we going? And that's what makes it make sense.
I wanted to go ahead and give Andre a last word on this, because he put an idea in the chat. So Andre, can you develop your thought a little bit, and then we'll move on to the next disputed point.
I don't know if it was understandable, but when someone is attacking, he knows where his sword is gonna be. He knows the movements that he will do and how he can feint and change the direction of the sword. The defender doesn't know that. The defender is subjected to the actions of the attacker, and that's why there is a priority of actions in the attacker, and it works for many fencers to just attacking. It's true that tournaments are not real life, but I saw people like winning tournaments without doing one single block on the whole fights, and I'm sure that if we translate that in the battlefield, we can find these types of fighters. But also it depends on the context, on the fighters that you find. There are fighters that they don't want to block your attacks and they will attack you as well. So being offensive, or in that case, it won't be useful.
I think we had a good discussion on that. Let's go to the other disputed topic here. I'm fencing the Italian tradition, but Destreza is my filter for good technique. Who wants to pick that up?
Cool, so answer it approved.
I would say that, like, and one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is like how Destreza is a way of thinking about fencing, really. We have these 14 actions, and you can take any system and you can parse it out by these 14 actions. So whether it's Italian, whether it's German, you can watch any fight and pick out, oh, that's basically an atajo. Oh, he's acting in the appropriato. So I think you could take anything and look at it through a Destreza lens.
But is that Destreza? Now this goes to straight back to Carranza and the dialogues. Is just because a person practices or sees some of the elements, similar to the other question that was asked later on, was if I don't fence, but am I practicing Destreza? And the answer is, again, getting into the dissertation, Puxwhite's dissertation, it's the full individual that they are trying to, Dr. Curtis, it's the full individual that they're trying to create, and that's what Carranza wants. That's the true Destreza out there, is the one who has all of the components to make the full individual. I'm just playing the argument here. Yes, anybody can pull off parts of the circle and do it, and they're doing fencing. They can use us to find out whether they're really doing a good job, but they're not being Destreza just because they know we're better than them.
So my view of this hypothetical Italian is that if this hypothetical Italian is practicing Italian fencing using Destreza as a way of winnowing out bad techniques, they will eventually become a diestro, because they'll winnow out all of the Italian technique.
Yeah, but I think I would argue.
Mic dropped.
Oh,
my goodness.
I thought I was pompous. That was beautiful.
Tonight's Pacheco and Speech Award goes to.
I think tonight's episode is going to make for a better drinking game than any of the previous lecture series. But
Probably.
With alcohol poisoning.
That's right out of Squares.
So how do you separate then, Lois, like the hypothetical Italian fencer from Viedma?
So one of the things that I find incredibly frustrating, but also incredibly wonderful and rewarding, is every time I look at a different author in the Destreza tradition, they have their own way of applying the concepts to fencing. And most of the time, they will back up their conclusions clearly so you can see how they got to them. And in that sense, I think that there's more than one right way to do Destreza, and sometimes those individual right ways can contradict.
Just because somebody is using the Aristotelian philosophical scientific method in order to winnow out their technique doesn't mean that they're making it Destreza, though. They're using that analytical method to get to the same place we did, but we're better because we're putting.
But if the Italian says specifically, I'm using the Destreza technique, not just Aristotelian stuff, because Agrippa was using Aristotle, and Agrippa predates us.
What makes him Italian?
You could look at this from another direction if you kind of turn it around and said, I am a diestro. Under what conditions would I fence using an Italian style, right? We have this upright posture, that's our quote unquote default guard, right? But if the causes are such that that is not a good position to be in, you're going to change it, right? Right angle is the default sort of building block fundamental starting point. It's the medio of guard posture, right? But that's not always going to be the right guard to just go in and hold that and be dogmatic about it, right? So there's a time where having that refused guard may be the diestro thing to do, right? Because you've identified the causes, you've understood why it works, you've understood why it would not work, and you are consciously and intentionally choosing to deviate from the medio.
Before we continue,
I do keep yelling, but I'm going to let somebody else speak.
Yeah, I just want to make it very, very clear that at no point am I intending to crap on anyone. Like, I don't think Italian styles are better or worse. My view is every school or style Yeah, every schooler style is a collection of techniques, of these branch techniques that hang on a trunk of a central core philosophy. And some schools have trunks that are very similar. They've got conceptual overlaps, and some schools don't have conceptual overlaps. So, like your question, Doug, is like both of our answers can be correct at the same time because of the way that we're approaching stuff. Like my view is if an Italian says I'm using the Destreza, not Aristotelian metaphysics, if they're saying I'm for causes to clean up my technique, I'd be like, yeah, that's Agrippa. You're Italian. Awesome.
But if they're using the philosophy but not the technique, and they're using the thought process but without the technique that's described by the masters, then yes, they're taking part of it. And I'm a full believer in people taking parts of Destreza and making it their own and using it to make their own styles better. 100%. You don't have to practice full 100% Destreza. That's my choice. But at the same time, I would not necessarily describe somebody who's practicing Italian and using Destreza philosophies and Destreza pedagogy and Destreza learning methodologies without the technique. You are not practicing Destreza. You're only practicing parts of Destreza.
Okay, so let me throw
let me ask a quick question here.
out there. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
So, Doug, would you distinguish between something being Destreza and someone being a Diestro? Or is Diestro tied specifically to Destreza for you?
Diestro is tied to Destreza for me, but there's Destreza-ish. I mean, again, part of being a Diestro is being pompous and having opinions, and I look at how some people practice Destreza, and I have opinions.
But at the same Destreza than that.
Let me ask you a question then.
Hold on. Okay. I think what would define this person as not being a Destreza based on this question, though, is they start by saying, I'm an Italian, but I use Destreza principles. You just told me you're not a Diestro by telling me you're an Italian. So it's how you view yourself in your eyes and how you're doing that. You're just using aspects of the art in order to make yourself better. But you've told me you don't see yourself as Diestro. If you don't see yourself as that, then you're not it.
Okay, so philosophical question. When is a vulgar technique true?
Can I say something?
When it works?
On that
you can demonstrations that it is concurrent with our philosophy.
So I would like to offer a bit of a historical case study. So I remember I read Charles Blair's article on the Spanish response to the Neapolitan school, the Destreza response to the Italian school, or the Neapolitan school. And Ettenhard, from what Charles Blair said, described the Neapolitans in this way. He said, like, when it comes to their fencing techniques, he said what they are doing is true fencing. He described it as true fencing. He's like, it's all like it works, and it works because it follows the same mathematical principles as our style. However, he clearly didn't think of the Marcelli people as doing the same style, nor do I think that, I think he would, I don't think he would have called them Diestros because, and this is where my opinion starts and Charles Blair's information ends. But I think Hard would have said they are using they're using Destreza principles to build and modify their technique and make it better and effective. But Destreza has this whole philosophy, and it does have this practical tradition that did grow up around it. And so by the time Ettenhard is saying, like, yeah, the Italians, their fencing is mathematically sound, and we know, and I'm reading Marcelli. Oh yeah, I'm reading heretical books. Burn me. But
Nice.
but Marcelli explicitly says, like, he has a bibliography, a list of his sources, and he says, like, yeah, I'm reading all the like famous Italian authors that we all know and love from HEMA. He says, but I'm also reading Pacheco and Mendoza. He cites them as inspirations for his style. And as I'm reading about the Marcelli school, I'm saying, okay, it's clearly based off of the Italian stuff that came before it, but he is very clearly altering their technique to bring it more in line with Pacheco's advice. And that was something that happened all over southern Italy because Spain was ruling them at the time. And so I don't know. I think that's the context where I'm thinking about this discussion, is like this discussion did actually happen historically. So let's look at what the people at the time said, and then let's see how much we want to keep those opinions.
So what's your opinion, Andrew?
My opinion, I would say that I think the Destreza consensus amongst the masters is that you have to know what you're doing in order to be a diestro. If you know what you're doing and you can justify what you're doing with the theory, you can hold your own as a diestro. And so if you're saying, like, yes, my technique, is like the practical part of the art is based off of, it looks like the Italian stuff, but really what I'm doing underneath is I'm conforming to these, mathematical and philosophical principles, and that's what you're doing. Well, then you can hold your own against Pacheco, and he can rant and scream all he wants. But if you don't know what you're doing, even if you're copying Pacheco exactly, but you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know why it works, you're vulgar. And honestly, that's my working opinion of what the wise vulgars was they had gotten their hands on a copy of Grandeza's and were using it as, more tips and tricks, but they didn't really but they weren't thinking, they were still thinking like vulgars. They were still thinking like Godinho. They were still, that was their thought process underneath the window dressing.
I think we'll have to let Andrew have the last word on that topic. We're not going to resolve it, but we should move on to the next question. I think it's Eric's turn to read, and this is the first of our actual questions proper.
So why do we think it was important to Carranza to initiate this new system of Destreza based on provable truths?
Can you repeat that one more time, Eric? I'm sorry, you kind of cut out a little bit.
Why do we think it was important to Carranza to initiate this new system of Destreza based on provable truths?
I think it was a combination of trying to inculcate a culture of scholasticism and thoughtfulness and mindfulness in young swords people, swordsmen at the time, and also to help preserve life, if he is to be believed, because a fight is chaos, and all LVD is a philosophical, well, the geometric aspects of LVD are an algorithm that you're trying to impose on the fight in order to prevent that chaos from getting out of hand, so that you can resolve it in a particular way. To preserve life, preserve your honor. And I think that what he was trying to do was elevate sword fighting, elevate combat, and elevate the combatant into better people overall. And doing that by making even a bloodthirsty endeavor into something philosophical and genteel was one approach in accomplishing that.
So to sort of build on that, because I'm reading through the compendio, like as I keep pushing through the compendio initial read, my initial review, I'm just astonished at how all the questions that I've had about this and the questions that we see our students having are asked explicitly by characters in this dialogue and are answered directly and cleanly. And as I'm reading this, like it feels really alive to me because we're in a similar situation now. We take a look at the current culture of discarding science, of discarding and disregarding and going with whatever you want to believe because, you know, science is a liar and everyone's trying to fool you. I can't help but wonder if Carranza kind of felt like he was in our position, or like if there's some kind of thematic resonance that we can find. He's just incredibly frustrated at all these people who are saying, this is how I fight because this is how it works. Dude, you got a scar on your face. Yes, but I am alive. Okay, but, you know. And so he goes to the refuge of things that can be proven. You don't have to take stuff on faith. You can approach an idea. You can say, does this idea work or not? Here is how I test whether it works or not. And now I can take the good verified information and build upon it so that I can sort of run my life on that concept.
I think to build on the answers that have come before this, I think that it's layers, and part of the layers has to do with the culture of the time. And in order to, as was said a couple of times, in order to prove that he was better and that his art was better, he had to talk in the language of the intellectual at the time. And part of that was expressing himself in the Aristotelian dialogue and the Aristotelian philosophy. I'm really interested in some of the conversation that Lois mentioned about these are the same questions we're asking, but I wonder whether we're asking them in order to provoke questions that are right answers and wrong answers, similar to how he did within the dialogue. But to go back to, he wanted to prove, the reason he wanted it to be proven was because that was the science at the time that proved that his art was better and a higher form and a higher discussion, and was more than just the technique. It was the discussion that happened, and it needed to be proved because that was what made him a knight of his period, a noble of the time, was because it was a higher, it's the culture that he chose the language and the science and the dialogue in order to prove his concept that it was better.
So it's marketing?
Oh yeah.
I think it's part of it. I think
he wanted to get a place in the court. He wanted to raise through the society.
The Tim and Rihanna, whatever.
But at the same time, as Dr. Del Curtis has said herself, is also, and this is where some of the discussion happens, where question is, you also make it unattainable to the people that don't understand it. So only the people that are going to understand it are the ones who put the effort and the time into understanding it and understanding the contradictions within it through the dialogue. And that's why nobody really understood it till Pacheco made it more into technique. But at the same time, that is how it was provable, because you're proving the people that want to know and that are going to seek deeper knowledge through learning. And
I strongly disagree that Carranza was obscuring knowledge. Carranza was doing his best to make this approachable information. It just
for Aristotelian dialogue, that thing is so convoluted, and I love it.
He explains it. All right, like y'all are good. All right, if y'all are my, you're going to see these bits of translation, but he walks you through everything. He walks you. Carilao is, I guess, his self-insertion. I'm not entirely sure, but these questions that we're asking, like we've got Meliso going, all right, so you've explained to me the basics of, we use mathematics to figure out our fencing, but what I don't get is that you're using these universal concepts when I've seen short, strong people trying to deal with tall, weak people. And then what happens if you have a tall, strong dude definitely reach over you and is doing his everything to come and get you? Like, how can you apply these universal rules to all these different applications? I don't get it. And he's like, okay, I'm going to do it slowly. Come with me. And that's where we start to get into the causes. And he breaks it down. Carranza breaks everything down. Like, seriously?
And this is
he was writing it through a dialogue. He wasn't writing it through a manual, though. So how are
But
you?
nobody, no. He wrote
Lois,
manuals at this time.
say that again.
The idea that we currently have about an educational piece of work is completely wrong for the 17th century. There is
That's why I want your opinion, because I'm curious as to how
a
he
dialogue
was
is the correct way to teach. A dialogue is exactly how you.
But how is he proving the technique? Through discussing the philosophy. That's why I'm curious about this in terms of.
You gotta wait to read it. But I promise you, it's coming out in the first dialogue. I promise you.
And back to marketing.
Cliffhanger.
I'm a patron. I got early access.
Vulgar fencers hate these 10 easy tricks.
Right? Yeah.
Particularly.
I think we've had a good discussion on that. Let's move on to our next question. Unfortunately, we're not going to resolve many of these. We're just having a dialogue. Okay. So Carranza's got this bit of satire in the book where a false fencing master wanders in and starts saying all sorts of ridiculous things. The question is, what is the danger of a bad fencing teacher or a bad teacher in general in Carranza's time?
Dead boys.
I wouldn't necessarily say death. I think from what I'm reading, and I could be wrong, it's misguided youth, and that's the idea, is using the philosophy and the education to bring the youth back. And I'm just freaking quoting your wife again, Puck. I'm sorry. But my philosophy is really shaped by a lot of her writings as well as Carranza's, because it's her interpretations of it. But again, it's shaping the youth. So not just death, but people can understand the history better than me, because I I'm curious.
Are we going to get into like a Cobra Kai versus Mr. Miyagi thing here?
So how many teachers do you think that applied to? I mean, there's plenty of fencing teachers who may or may not have cared anything except someone was going to show up and pay them for the next lesson. So let's dig into that just a little bit more.
I would say that I heard a quote recently that made me think a lot about the way I've seen you guys teach. And it was that good leaders create good followers. Great leaders create great leaders. And I think that's really what is the essence of a good teacher, is you're not just getting people in the door, delivering the material, and then whatever, you're not absolved of responsibility the moment class ends, right? Because what you create in your students and what they go forward and carry into the world is a direct reflection of the energy, the time, the love, the perception, the intention that you put into them. So if that's the platform that you're teaching from, that's what you're going to create in the world. And if you are teaching just as, rote and just kind of checking off the boxes and then sending people out the door, you're at best missing an opportunity, and at worst, creating people that are going to go out and perpetuate that, that way of doing things. Which makes me really, really, really appreciate my teachers very much. So thank you, guys.
Gold star. Okay, so
it's not going to help you in your exams,
right? So
Pocket sand.
So we've talked a little bit about what that's like in Carranza's time, but how is there any difference today? Is the impact of not just the impact, but specifically the danger of a bad teacher today different than that of a bad teacher in Carranza's time?
No.
I just want to read something we have from Mark, if he's not going to speak up, because he put something in the chat. And Mark says, a bad teacher might make a bad fencer who might become a dead fencer. worse, a bad teacher can create a bad person who can cause so much more damage. I think that's a good point.
I like that too, because I mean, we've seen a lot of people who aren't intending to do something bad, right? They might think they're doing something good, but they are bad. That can have consequences.
And it's just passing on the technique alone without any of the lessons. Does that make a bad teacher? Because there's a lot of manuals out there that just do that, that don't get into the philosophy that a lot of the Spanish styles do. Does that make them bad?
Well, I don't think any teaching really exists in isolation. I think real
It does when you're learning alone from the damn material.
Yeah, right.
400 years later, and all he's got is a dang book.
Right. I mean, you do the best with what you can, but I think where teaching really kicks into overdrive is when it's directly transmitted. And to use an example from fencing, right? You can read Page to Practice, and you can practice the techniques as best you understand them, and they're very well explained there. They're very well illustrated there. But the first time I fenced puck, like that was like, right? And it had nothing to do with him telling me, put your arm here, do this, try to be more like that. It was direct transmission, because the way he held himself, the way he spoke, the way he was perceptive of what I was doing and gave unspeaking feedback through his blade, like that's magic. Like that's where real, like high level teaching happens. It's not in the words, it's not in the instructions, it's not in the book. It's in the direct transmission from teacher to student. The books are great tools. They're very useful, and they can cut down a lot of the time of creating the knowledge base that we then work from to build. But the real like high caliber teaching is always from person to person.
I agree, and I hate you at the same time for that.
So I've got a slight twist on this. What degree does a good or bad teacher affect their student, and to what degree is the good or bad nature of the student coming into play?
I would say that the student is probably the most necessary thing, because even if you have the best teacher in the world and the student is not receptive and, engaged and committed to the learning process, even the best teacher in the world is not going to be able to get through them. But if you have a student who is open and engaged and, eager to work, then the teacher can then, pour everything they have into them. Now, a bad teacher, I mean, it's hard to say because this is really abstract, but a bad teacher might take advantage of that too. So
when we look at what teachers say today, right? Like a teacher who says that's a good teacher, it might be that they're able to like put something well and teach it in an entertaining way or whatever. But what really gets called out is someone who can inspire the incurious or the people who aren't involved, right? Someone who can actually teach to someone who is not really receptive, who can change their nature to be receptive.
I want to mention something from Kate Hickey's lecture that I think is really important, that's been coming back into my life over and over ever since she said it, was that when you have a student that's not getting it, it's not a problem with the student, it's a problem with the teacher. It's that you're missing a teaching opportunity or a way of reframing what you're doing or being aware of what the needs of that student are in order to find the way in to how they will receive what you're trying to teach. And I think that's super important. I've used it with my toddlers since she said it, like as an alternative to completely losing my mind. But I think that's super critical, and it ties into what you were just saying, Aaron.
I've been in the martial arts for a long time, and I've seen bad people that are, in fact, one of my first masters, before I really knew what I was looking for, he was a horrible human being. He really was. But he was a good fighter, and he taught you how to move. And I really learned a lot about movement from him until I couldn't take the the emotional stuff that went along with it that I saw him doing, because I wasn't there to look for a father figure, but some of his students were, and he fostered that sort of dependent relationship in those sort of things, and encouraged them not to seek knowledge on the outside. So he was a horrible human being, but he had good techniques. So when you say bad teacher, good teacher, are you talking, again, if you're getting back to Quran's and bringing it back to our conversation, are you talking about the morals of the individual versus the effectiveness of their technique? And that's where I think that those two cross, because I've also have really great, and again, being in a later part of my life, I'm probably with one of the best instructors that I've ever had right now in my karate, who again, I'm not there for the morals, but how he breaks things down for people, and he's a good person too, and how he treats his students as the whole. So it's a great combination. So again, morals meet technique. What is good? What is bad? Is bad just effective? Is bad the morals underneath it? And what if somebody just wants technique and they don't want morals? So did I lived Cobra Kai for many years, and I'm talking creases, not even Johnny's, and it was, yeah, it was what it was. But I learned things, But
I just have to say, Doug, I am grateful that you have survived as intact and with as much integrity as you have, because that can be beyond caustic. That horrifying.
I saw him hit. Yeah, there was just ugly stuff. That's all I'm going to say. But at the same time, I'm a therapist, so there you go. I went to therapy. Yeah, it's. But yeah, so that's where I think the individuals and our responsibility as teachers come into play, and how you see your role for that. So what's a good teacher? What's a bad teacher? I think, like everything else, there's layers.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to our next question. Although I do want to bring attention to something that Lois brought up in the chat, and maybe this Cobra Kai analogy that we've all been sort of dancing around is useful here. But like the original Cobra Kai had a lot of public reputation because their fighters were so good. Well, Mr. Miyagi had one student, right? So not a lot of reputation, but a lot of personal honor. So Lois brings up the difference between public-facing honor and personal honor in response. In thinking about these teachers, we might have somebody who's famous for training really, really effective fighters, but is not, just like you were talking about, Doug, who's not a good human being. Okay, let's move on to our next question. What are one or two phrases of Destreza theory that you keep coming back to, sort of personal touchstones within the tradition? How are they reflected in your fencing or teaching? And on this one, we'll just take turns. So anybody that wants to speak, just think about what are the Destreza pieces that really speak to you, one or two of them, and talk about it, and then we'll go on to the next person.
I'll toss one out there. I won't toss multiple, but I mean, footwork. If you can't move in this art, then there is no art. I mean, obviously the morals and the philosophy are a second touchstone for me, but that's exploration that keeps it alive. But what keeps me alive is the footwork at the same time. And I think that there is so much depth to that dance, and how you're watching everybody, from how Puck moves, how Tone moves, how Alberto moves, how the Martinez moves, watching each of their various interpretations, but it all comes down to how you apply that footwork, how far apart your feet are, how close they are. That footwork it's the foundation for everything. And that's my touchstone personally.
For me, if we're talking about a phrase, and I apologize in advance, Doug, I'm so sorry. Suggest for causes. the whole, the whole four causes thing, I know can be an absolute, can feel impenetrable. It can feel like it's an obstruction. But once you sort of get the shorthand done, and you can play with the shorthand, what is it for me, and when I convey it to students, is it reminds me to be fluid, and it reminds me that Destreza is not active art. It is, it's you don't live in right angle, because living in right angle is not, that's not using the most advantageous action, motion, distance, position for your given position against the opponent's given position and arrangement at any given time.
Can you
I don't even
prescriptive art for those of us who were born in Oklahoma?
so a prescriptive art is doing it is always like this. Always like this, as opposed to, here is the purpose of an atajo. You want to subject your opponent. You want to do it from above. You want to do it with equal or greater degrees of strength to make sure that you maintain control, and you want to take that point offline enough so that person cannot just strike you in one go. There are, in fact, potentially an infinite number of arrangements that will satisfy those requirements. So prescriptive, you must always have your hand in, when you're doing an inside atajo, you must always have your sword hand just inside the joint of your offhand arm, and it must always be, you must always have your elbow at a particular angle, and you must always do an inside transverse that is 2 of your own foot widths. That's prescriptive, and that's not, like, we all understand that that's not useful. It might be good as a starting point to give students an idea of what a technique looks like in general. But once we get them to feel what an atajo to the inside might look and feel like, then we start explaining the actual technique. It's an electron cloud. It's the difference between classical physics and quantum physics. What is or is not a technique is an electron cloud. There are a variety of that do qualify as that value, but there are some that clearly don't. But adjust for causes is a little mantra that I bring back to myself and I bring back to my students when I feel like I or they are getting stuck in, no, but I've done it wrong. And I'm like, nah, you haven't. You did it a little differently. Maybe you took a different extreme here, but look at the arrangement of your opponent and look at the space between you. You're still holding to principles because you have kept the sword between you and them, and you've subjected your weapons. So even if it feels a little weird, if you do a quick check-in with yourself, you'll see that you have still adhered to this set of principles. and then from there, you can continue into a space that's more familiar to you, as long as it keeps you safe.
So I think, so first, Lois, I want to say, I think I really like the way that you think, and that's what I want to evolve to.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, but I think, so interesting, I'm going to have a slightly different take on this question, because I think this question has kind of revealed a bit of a personal weakness of mine, and it's that I don't actually have a bit of a center yet. Right now I still very much consider myself a beginner in Destreza, and right now I'm still kind of got the whole kid in a candy shop mentality where it's like, ooh, this is cool, this is cool, this is cool, this is cool, and I haven't quite learned how to bite down on something and sort of grow it from that. However, I do know that what's consistently helped me, like, practically is using the right angle. It's that maximizing of defensive distance and offensive threat, and it's this nice medio from which you can do all sorts of interesting things. And when I'm focused on just keeping that point in presence, usually I can take advantage of dispositives a bit better, and that's where I guess my that's I think where my epee technique from college can find a bit of a home in Destreza, maybe. But that's my thing. But my ultimate answer is I haven't found my center yet, and I'm still looking for it. But I would like to evolve. I would like to evolve to Lois's. Everything is like there's that spectrum of things that qualify the real essence of whatever the technique is.
I think the thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately, more and more, is the idea of the appropriato, acting in those little spaces where we have an opportunity, and it almost seems to me that, like, everything else aside, stacking that up as much as you can in your favor is very much like a key to the whole process. It really, both in terms of creating those opportunities in your opponent and taking advantage of them, but also in minimizing your movements so that you are not necessarily faster, but less slow, if that makes sense. Because the ability to be fast is going to decline, for all kinds of reasons as time goes by. But the ability to be less slow and to perceive those units of opportunity in your opponent will always be there. And I even I've started to, like, this has sort of invaded my thinking in life in general. Like, I was driving the other day and I was in an intersection and there was another car and we are like, okay, who's going to make it first? And at first my instinct is like, oh, if I try to go faster, I'm going to get by first and I'll beat them, But then I start thinking, like, okay, if I stop and I hold and I let them go by first, they can't possibly hit me, right? I've created an opportunity where I'm defended. I can't be hit. And I can go forward with my plan, which is to get through the intersection completely unscathed under, all but inconceivable circumstances. So just thinking in terms of, like, controlling time, that's useful in fencing. It's useful in life, and changing your priority structure in order to do that changes the way you make decisions. So that's what I'm thinking about.
All right, I think we've had 3 people. I want to make sure that everybody feels welcome to speak on this one.
I think probably the phrase that expresses the most for me is because it's just those short little digestible pieces that I like. I've got a Maris, and where he essentially boils everything down to, you want to get into a position where you can make shorter, fewer, and thus faster movements. And so I usually start from a fairly aggressive virtual atajo even as I enter MVP. I spend a lot of time in my right angle, and I have a very aggressive atajo. But what I'm really trying to do is force a bit of a panic wider movement around the circle of or around my defense rather, and that was all I had to really stick in my head, because my ADHD is pretty vile. So for a really long time, Tamariz is one of the first treatises that I was able to find and pour over back when you could still track down the occasional PDF. Well, back when you could barely find them in PDF rather. And I was trying to apply LVD principles to SCA heavy spear, sword and board, and greatsword, because my knight and Ken and Slight Highlander obsession in junior high had all introduced me to Spanish fencing and the idea of Spanish fencing, but the resources were kind of thin on the ground, and I was trying to get the principles burned into my ADD head. And that was one of the ones that stuck out to me, was you're always trying to find that shorter, fewer set of movements that allow you to seem freakishly fast when really you're just feeding the geometry. And that's sort of the center, the core of the way I end up fighting, is seizing that center line really aggressively, and then forcing everything to happen around me by much more circuitous routes. and that's what's stuck as the technical aspect.
I got something. When I first started Destreza, I found myself either getting stabbed a lot, doubling a lot, or getting a hit, but it wasn't very clean. And then one day, Puck was talking about how Destreza is, I think, the church of appropriato is what he put it to. And I find if I try and stay within the realms of working in the appropriato, I do significantly better. And anytime I get outside those bastions of the church, I get stabbed a lot more. So whenever I'm getting stabbed, I think of, I need to go back to my church, and then I do a lot better.
Sanctuary, sanctuary.
Yep.
My sanctuary is hitting you.
Now we're back to the best defense is a good offense.
I never said it. So Ken had a note here that he says, if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have answered a lot like Lois. Now I strip it down to context and proportion. Did you want to delve into that a little bit, Ken? You're muted, though.
You're on mute. You're muted. You're muted again.
I can't hear you.
Oh, you have no audio. You're not muted, but you have no audio.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump in on that one before we move on?
For me, what I get out of not so much a phrase that sets me, but when I bench Destreza as opposed to my Italian, I am much more responsive to my opponents. I work to control my center, and then I don't really go with a plan. I wait for them to tell me how they want to die, and let them make the mistake instead of trying to force an action on them, which kind of goes into Lois's adjust for causes of let them, go through and wait for them to commit to some position that'll give me that spot, especially being short with bad knees who can't lunge for distance at all.
That's good. All right. Anybody else? Andre, Aleix, anyone?
I'm trying to think of one specific thing, but I guess I could take Guerra de la Vega's whatever posture he's in, use atajo. It's something that solves many problems by not having to think what you have to do. Simply put your sword where it annoys them the most, be it physical or virtual atajo, and then do whatever comes up.
Like it.
Yeah, I will cite my beloved Debrea, the 33% of Destreza, some people call it, because he mentions that even before doing atajo or anything to your enemy, to keep the distance, enter and get out, just to know what kind of enemy it is. Because if he's a suicidal, even doing an atajo and thrusting him in the chest won't work. He will just remove your eyes with his own hands. So he even places a song talking about a warrior who studies his enemy before entering in the battle. I mean, that's true. It's because it's something that I always do in every fight. I study it before entering.
So in some sense, a little bit like a chess match where you have an early game, a mid game, and an ending game. All right. Anybody else want to jump in on this before we move on to the next one?
Okay, should we go?
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Are there any concepts or terminology from other systems that you have a hard time translating easily into Destreza? How is that related to your fencing or reflected in your fencing? Maybe a slight variation on this. Is there a term from another system that isn't in Destreza that you wish was, right? And we might be able to, as a group, kind of figure out how we might address that.
I don't necessarily have a problem understanding it in theory, but just my brain does not grasp and in fact, I with one of the groups I was in, we just had a conversation about time concepts among the different styles. And I was speaking on the Spanish style while others were speaking on the Italians and the Germans and crossing all of those and finding all of the similarities. But I just don't think like an Italian when it comes to time. I don't know why. And I'm really comfortable with that, to be honest with you. I understand it in theory, but if I think too much about their time and their distance, I just translate what they're saying into what I do. That's it. I mean, but Italian time and distance, I'm okay being ignorant on it, other than understanding it in a theoretical concept.
So, Andrew, when you say you like tempo, do you mean the definition of tempo as the opportune moment in which to strike?
Yeah.
Andre, you're saying some things in the chat. Maybe you could develop those ideas a little bit.
Can you hear me?
We can now, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, there is the injures before time, like it's when your opponent is starting an action, but he's in the middle of it, for example, doing a dispositive movement. Then there is on time, that it's when he does an action. For example, you can do a repair of reverse or a cut and thrust him at the same time. And then there is after the time, and Tamariz collects the tretas of Pacheco and makes emphasis on which ones are before time, during time, and on time. He makes a really good summary of that. I think it's soon there will be available a translation of Tamariz if it's not already there.
They discuss some of the other things that the Italians do, like in the time of a step and in a moment of stillness or things like that.
Well, it talks about when to react and how to react, because during the movement that the concher is doing it, for example, if he's doing a reverse, depending of when you start the action, you will do one thing or the other. Before time is one action, during time it's another option, and after the time there is another option. And it talks to you about your position, your feet, your posture, and you decide, well, or your body decides when to do each one.
Right, we have Mike in the chat saying that one of the things he likes is Finding the Blade and Cavazioni, which is the terrible influence of John O'Mara.
In some of the Destreza texts, they do talk about finding the blade, use the same, or winning the blade, the gagnant.
Yeah, and in counters to the Bulgars, we have Pacheco talking about gaining and regaining as well. Cruzado's commentary actually expands that quite a lot. There's a huge section in the Cruzado notes on gaining and regaining. We had a good bit of discussion about Tahoe and right angle. Let's try this, and I'm going to poke at Caden Wang specifically on this one because I know he's got an opinion. A Tahoe or right angle? Choose one and explain why.
You're on mute though, Caden.
He didn't expect me to put him on the spot.
Right. You better.
There he is.
Wait, you want me to like say which one's better?
Choose a Tahoe or right angle and give us a brief defense of your choice.
That depends on like quite a bit of things, right? So I guess if I'm
I think we lost you, Caden.
I guess right angle because it is just you have more options from there, and you're passively threatening your opponent, and then it's just more versatile because you can use right angle as a deterrent, and then you can also use it to probe and to attack. So right angle is I'd choose right angle.
All right. If this was a Pokemon battle, we know which one it would be. And if you're curious about this, like Caden actually lays out a really solid argument for his feelings on right angle. If you haven't listened to his lecture, you should check it out. It's pretty interesting. All right, so we have Caden's response. Let's find out what everybody else thinks.
Tahoe. The right angle properly applied to my mind is itself an Tahoe. You should be, in theory, already in preparation to close that line. Wherever the threat is, you're going to adjust either which direction your units are in, or you're going to align your edge depending on where your opponent is, even from the right angle. Before you enter MVP, you should be aware of what the critical vectors are by which your opponent can deliver either a cut or a thrust, and you should be able to be aligning your right angle or any subsequent entry into the MVP, and then have an idea of how you're going to be closing that line, which is going to force his hand around your defense, and you know which way he's going, so you're already winning the fight. You're well into your KDPA loop long before you get into that range from that perspective, and that is an outcome of establishing an Tahoe by way of entering with the right angle. The right angle is just a really narrow Tahoe.
All right, controversial answer. There's no such thing as right angle. It's all a Tahoe.
What if your blade is underneath theirs, like in line or narrowing or weak under strong? Is it a Tahoe, or is it like a weird right angle?
Mark, yeah, Mark comes out swinging.
I blame certain people who I won't name, but I have recently fell in love with using the false edge when my blade's under theirs to do nasty things as I'm stepping to the side. So I vote right angle just because of that reason, because I find it very useful all of a sudden, something I never even thought to use before.
I think they have similarities, and one of the similarities between them is their transition points in time. The right angle, as much as it's fixed in a picture, is not fixed when you're moving. You're constantly moving from the right angle to the Tahoe to back. This is all part of the dance. It's all part of the transition within it. So are they the same thing? No, they are two different points in time. And sometimes they meet and you can define them as the same thing at the same time, but what's the intention of the Destreza when they're applying it? Do they mean that they're applying it as I'm just standing there, or do they mean that they're moving that right angle into an atajo and that's their intention? Because really, that's what it comes down to: is what's the intention of the Destreza as they're applying that movement.
So it was right angle a medio, and the atajos are the extremes.
Medio is not right angle. You can be in medio and be in right angle at the same time, but again, they don't necessarily. Medio is where you're standing. Right angle is how you're standing in that moment, I would say.
So and
if I'm full of crap, please tell me.
Well, no, I was just saying, because right angle, you're right in the middle, right? It's like the equivalent of fingernails in as opposed to like fingernails up or down. Right, so like a tajo is, moving away from that center line, away from that medio. But we could also argue that right angle is an extreme, right? Because it's with the arm all the way out. Extreme forward. I don't know.
Maybe it's because that I view the idea of it being an algorithmic imposition of will. Anytime you have to make more than one movement in order to get to me, whereas I only have to make the one movement to get to you, I have a tajo. If I can make two movements to get to you and you have three, I have a tajo. And that is a control on the direction that the fight is going to take. So for me, the right angle, I have closed my line. You have to address this. And that's why I say that it's a form of atajo, because, and this is where I've gotten into more than one e-brawl, is I actually like including the idea of the shortcut in my definition of atajo, because if I have atajo, I always have the shortcut. I can get to you before you can get to me. That's the whole point. And militarily, it's the same thing, right? I can atajar another unit, another enemy unit. And in order to do so, I have to be able to get across, like overland, going around the long way. And so I'm going to arrive in a place faster than you, better prepared than you, and with more wind and material than you. I have the atajo.
I think that depends, though, on when you say you have the right angle, it'll take them more movements. That depends on two circumstances. One, that they're not suicidal and willing to take the hit in order to hit you because you don't have their line blocked. Or two, that they don't have reach on you. Because I can have the right angle, and if somebody is 6 foot too much, he can still hit me without me actually being able to hit him first.
Then the right angle is the wrong position at that point. It will not give you the atajo. But properly executed, the right angle gives you the atajo. That's why you choose your medio. That's why as you step into MVP, you're making decisions about whether you're going to threaten the wrist on the outside or the inside. You're establishing the geometry before you step inside that circle, or you don't step inside that circle. That's the advice. And the atajo, sorry, the right angle is intended to close your lines, present a threat, and force them around. They will either have to beat your blade aside, circumvent it, or by footwork dispose themselves in such a manner as to be able to reach you. But they will have to do something to get to you if you're applying that right angle properly. And if that right angle is not going to defend you, then don't use it. This is the wrong time. You got to get back out to MVP.
Oh, I agree on that part. I'm almost never at right angle inside of medieval proportion. I just wouldn't consider it a Tahoe because it is still depending on, to my mind, on them not being suicidal. And I've fenced too many people who will take the hit because they think they're fast enough.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. The relationship, see, and this is where, because to me, when I'm entering, again, I try to align my true edge in such a way that I've got virtual atajo, even if it's a subtle one. because that gives you a short distance to the vector by which their blade would have to ascend or descend in order to get to me. But I guess if you're rigidly conceiving the right angle as like this particular position, right nails in, and directly up the diameter only, then yeah, it can be got around, and then someone can do something to you. But again, to me, if you don't have that virtual atajo, or if you don't have an idea sort of algorithmically of what the one or two options that you're going to leave this person are, you shouldn't be getting inside MVP.
So Ken has a really interesting point here that nobody has mentioned yet, that Destreza dictates inequality. I might even go so far as to add that that's the advantage, is that you're trying to force an inequalities so that you have advantage. And he says your feet are as critical to making an advantage as the blade. So at angle Pokemon or the Ataho, he's choosing the footwork Pokemon. He's going off script.
Yes, what he said. That's all I'm going to say. Footwork, yes.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. If anybody else wants to jump in on that last Ataho or right angle question, feel free to jump in. We'll take a look at our next questions. Maybe we'll pick a good one. Eric, this next one is yours. So pick one.
One here that we can answer in less than an hour. So, do you think that Pacheco was successful as a master of the tradition?
You're going to have to be more specific about what you mean by master of the tradition. Because if you mean master of the tradition is somebody who teaches and physically imparts the tradition to other people in an actual space, I don't know. There may be that'll tell us that yes, he did or he didn't. But if we're talking about, a master as someone who imparts information through books or pictures, it depends on how you feel about his approach.
So,
yeah, the question
given that the only teaching that we have from him is through his books, we have to, adjust for causes here, right? Was he a good teacher or a bad teacher? Was he a good person, bad person?
He is kind of the reason we're all here. Let's just say that. I mean, regardless of whether my teachers were bad or not, I'm the result of the knowledge that was imparted to me, and they were still masters. I mean,
he was successful enough to get everyone else to test,
or he sued them into it.
He has certainly managed to create a persona that a legend that persists itself in our current modern tradition. I mean, he has a drinking game. That's got to count for something, right?
This is the first time the reference to the drinking game has been the cause of everyone taking a drink.
So I would like to, again, because I love the history part of Destreza, I would like to point out that Pacheco, like when everybody's either talking, when everybody's talking about Pacheco, either saying like this is great, here Pacheco says so, or they're spending copious amounts of time, energy, and money arguing against Pacheco. Pacheco, regardless, Pacheco's still still the center of conversation. You don't do that without that. That's an accomplishment. In terms of how effective he was, I think that a lot of the masters will trace their idea. A lot of the masters after Pacheco will, again, trace everything they do either learning from Pacheco and his writings or reacting against it. But even reacting against it is a form of learning. So I think I think he did effectively pass on, whatever Carranza was doing and bring it into another generation. In terms of who he was like as a person, I would like to remind everybody of the online disinhibition effect, or as the internet calls it, the gift. The greater internet quad theory. I think Pacheco very well could have been a normal, decent human being in person, but when he's sitting behind his printing press, he could turn into a troll. It's a known psychological phenomenon.
I think if you were to ask which would you rather be like Carranza or like Pacheco, I think I would rather be like Carranza, knowing what I know about his life and his attitude and his ethos.
Eric, that's false. Pacheco knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
For a longer period of time. So I think
we're into a whole new level of drinking game here.
Yeah, we really are.
Let's not mention that person by name who still exists on the internet.
I think he was the master. I think, again, whether you like him or not doesn't matter. He was still a master, and he's the reason. I mean, Alberto even talked about it. And so many other people. If all we had was Carranza's book, it would be great philosophy talking about this, but people wouldn't know what he was. They wouldn't know a lot of the techniques. It's really Pacheco who popularized it and brought the techniques to us. So we might not like him as a person, but he brought us something. And I mean, there's value in that.
I'm still not so sure that you can't learn out of Carranza, but I can't prove that either way until I finish reading the book. So carry on.
No, Lois, please prove me wrong. Please translate Carranza for me. Be a spite translator. I would love that so much. I've been wanting Carranza forever.
I've translated Carranza just to prove wrong, man. I'm just going to prove you wrong.
And I win.
So Andre has an interesting point. He says he once said that Pacheco is like Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson didn't invent the moonwalk, but he did make it famous. I have been refraining from answering a lot of these questions, but there was a time where we worked through Pacheco's counters to the Bulgars in a lot of detail, and more than once, I was finding something that wasn't working. And when I went back and read the original text, it was because I wasn't doing what Pacheco had said. And so as soon as I was like, oh, Pacheco says do this, and then I tried it and it worked. So take that for what it is.
Yeah, that's a saying that I had, like, and then when I was studying Destreza, with my various schools, something wouldn't work, and so the instructor would come over and be like, no, watch, okay, do this. And then I do it the way they properly showed me. And I'd be like, oh, it works. If you do what sensei says, it works. And I still use it. I probably use that at some point.
No. All right, so we are at time for our community get together here. So just like show of hands or in the chat, was this a useful conversation for you? And would you want to do something like this again? Okay, because we certainly did not make it through all of our questions. Another question just for everybody. Was sort of self-moderating the conversation working for us, or would you rather we take a more active hand and pass off to people? All right, so let's say that you felt like it was difficult to be heard. Just drop a 1 in the chat, and if you felt like it was working, drop 5 or some number in between.
And also, I'd probably say if people felt that if you can give them a place to email you or converse with you, Puck, because not everybody's as loud as me. So if they want to, be heard more. I'd like them to have a venue to let you guys know that.
Yeah, if you felt like we were talking over you or that you didn't have a chance to get what you wanted in, shoot me a note. You don't have to say it publicly. You can just say, hey, I prefer this, and I'd be happy to hear that. Feedback is good. What was it Kate said? Feedback is a form of love. Okay, I'm afraid that normally we would have a Q&A in this time, but it's my little guy's birthday, so I have a hard stop at about right now. But next week, our speaker will be Ken Wildwind, who is right there. Wave, Ken. And he's going to be talking to us. He is going to be talking to us about, let's see, I have it in my notes. The thing is, I know more about what Ken means to me because he was a real community leader in his part of the world. But he's going to talk about what it's like to come in to Destreza from an outsider's perspective, a student of a system that's documented in a language that he can't read, and the challenges and experiences with that. So that's next week, and I will see you guys then. Everybody be safe.
Good everyone.